Welcome back, ATL. We're back in studio and we are really excited. We've been out for a few weeks, but we're back and resuming here. And I'm so excited because I have one of our special guests with us here, Brandi. And today we're going to talk all things education and parenting. We want you to go ahead and subscribe to ATL Rise podcast if you have not already, because we want you to be first to be notified whenever there's new content. So, Brandi, we're excited to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, we got to talk before we started recording, and I got to learn a little bit about your background and education. Do you mind talking to the audience about what your background is, how you started in psychology, and so forth?
Sure. I actually started out as a special education teacher and went back and respecialized in school psychology. I worked as a school psychologist for several years, and I had a lot of parents asking me questions about how IEPs work, how 504s work. Since that time, I've shifted out of public schools and into the private setting, and currently I do a lot of work helping with parents understanding how the IEP and 504 process works so that their kids can get extra help in school. And I do that through my company, Your IEP Source.
That's amazing. So you are a doctor of psychology, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And so your background has been working with public schools, and then you made the shift how long ago to the private sector?
It was about 10 years ago that I switched out of public schools and into the private side of things. I was doing primarily psychological evaluations, and then a lot of people came to me asking specific questions about just the education side of it. So it's like, this is another niche that deserves its own attention and energy. Like, once we have the diagnosis, how do you get that information to the school so that they can get your child the help that they need?
Yeah, no, that's huge. And I think we see that a lot at iRaise. A lot of parents don't know what to do or don't know how to go about getting their kids the help that they need. And so I think your work is so crucial. You've seen a gap area and you were able to jump in and fill that. What was it like for you when you were in public schools? What were some of the common issues that you see?
It was a combination of things. Some of it was parents that knew that their child needed assistance, but they weren't really sure what are the things that we need to do, what steps do we need to take. So sometimes it was a lack of education about what your action steps should be. Sometimes it was situations where parents might have a concern about their child being evaluated. They were hesitant to have their child labeled, and so they didn't want to pursue evaluations or extra help for their children for those reasons. So those are kind of two big categories that I saw families falling into, and so I wanted to be able to provide some more direct assistance outside of being a part of that public school entity.
Yeah. What was one of the reasons why you just made that decision? Like, wanting to come outside of the realm of public schools. I know public school has its own challenges that many people deal with, teachers, principals, parents, students. What made you decide to make the switch outside of public school?
When I got started, I really thought I was going to be 30 years to the pension, all the way done, and that was going to be my career forever. I feel like most of the people that work in public schools do it because they love kids. They're wanting to help kids and families, but a lot of times there are systemic issues that prevent you from being able to do that fully. There are time constraints. There are so many children to serve. You can't give those children the attention that they really need and deserve. There might be staffing issues that you just can't get to the kids as much as you need to. It might be the materials, it might be the instruction. The things that we have don't match up with what those students need. So as much as I wanted to be able to do the right thing for my students a lot of the time, I didn't have the resources, time, money, things like that to be able to do those things. So I wanted to be able to get outside of those constraints and barriers so that I could work with families more directly and let them know, hey, even if they're not putting this on the table as an offer to you, if you go in here and ask for this, this is something that your child deserves and they should be providing. So let's get that written into their IEP or 504 so that they can get that help.
That's amazing. And being in government, sometimes it's very frustrating. And essentially when you're working for schools, you're working in government. I worked in government for 10 years at New York State and decided I'd be more effective running an organization, which is why I made the switch. So I understand the frustration when you truly get into this work because you love kids and you love families and you really do want to see change. But there are all these systemic barriers that really prevent you from doing what you need to do to help families. But if you could talk a little bit about the 504. Some people have no idea what that law is or where it came from or what it incorporates. If you can talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, when there are kids that have some sort of a diagnosis, there are two different ways that they can get assistance. One is special education through an IEP. Mm-hmm. Another way is to get some accommodations through a 504 plan. Mm-hmm. So 504 is a part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's the same law that's going to require us to have wheelchair ramps, provide things in Braille for mm-hmm. people that have visual impairments. If a child has a diagnosis that requires some accommodations in the school setting, they're still in a general education setting, but it's just recognition that they need some accommodations. So a lot of times, some students that have ADHD might need extra time. They might need preferential seating. They might need prompts and reminders to stay on task. Mm-hmm. So those are examples of some of the common 504 accommodations that I see. And also kids that have medical diagnoses. Sometimes those are also handled through 504 plans pretty often. So that would be the students receiving accommodations completely in their general education setting. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're really receiving specialized instruction, which that would be the difference if they had an IEP through special education. Okay,
and so you also work with both students. So
yes,
the difference between the two. So explaining the IEP and how that is different from the 504.
Yeah, there are a couple of differences between IEPs and 504s. What I just mentioned a few minutes ago, a 504 plan is going to give accommodations only, mm-hmm. Whereas an IEP is going to give accommodations and also services. If your child needs specialized instruction to learn how to read better, mm-hmm. they're going to get that instruction. If they need specialized instruction to learn some coping skills or emotional regulation skills, we're going to build that into their plan, and a teacher will monitor them on some specific goals and objectives. Mm-hmm. So part of it is, are you getting accommodations and services, or are accommodations enough? Mm-hmm. And also, they're based in different laws. So again, 504 is all about the accommodations. We're going to give you access to the educational environment. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's the special education law, and that's more about educational benefit. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of the two big differences. One is accommodations, access to the instruction. Mm-hmm. The other one is special education. We're actually providing services to help you improve your skills.
Learned so much just talking to you. So where does the mental health piece fit in? The clinical services, psychological services, where if a kid is dealing with the mental health diagnoses, not related to academic, where do they go to receive that support?
It kind of depends on where the student's current functioning is at mm-hmm. that time. There are some kids that if we just have a general understanding this child has anxiety or depression mm-hmm. or whatever their diagnosis is, we make their teacher aware of it. This is their diagnosis. They might need to take some extra time out. They mm-hmm. might be absent from school a few more days because they need to see their therapist. Mm-hmm. A 504 plan could be sufficient for that student. Mm-hmm. If it's somebody that is in need of more support, we might need to look at making them eligible for special education so that they can get maybe some counseling services written into their IEP so that they can learn those coping skills that they need to, as opposed to just accommodating for the weaknesses that they have and the difficulties that they have. So it kind of depends on what the severity level it is at any given point in time, how much help that they're going to need.
Yeah. When over the last few years, I know there's been an uptick in mental health issues, especially with teenagers dealing with extreme levels of anxiety, suicide ideation, and depression. Have you noticed any of those trends in your work, working with families?
Yes. I feel like the pandemic just keeps going on, and it's the gift that just keeps on giving.
Yeah.
When we first were in the lockdown and parents were with their student and realized, hey, they really are having more academic difficulties than what I thought they were, we
Right.
started to see an uptick of people that were reaching out for evaluations, therapy, things like that. As time went on and kids got more isolated and things like that, we saw a lot of depression set in.
Yeah.
When it's time to return to school, but you haven't been there for weeks or months, depending upon when your district reopened, we saw a lot of kids coming in with anxiety at that time, or anxiety about, like, am I going to get sick because, like, I've been isolated this whole time? Am I going to get germs? So it's just kind of been like this big wave that we've been riding. The way that it looks and the different challenges that have come up have slightly changed in the way that they've been presenting. We had a huge backlog as far as mental health providers being able to keep up. I feel like some of those wait lists are getting down now, but still not at the level. still not at the level that they were before COVID. So. People are still looking for help, and it's been difficult, and I don't feel like that recovery has fully come around mental health wise or academic wise for many students.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Recently, I was in a conference with professionals from around the world, and there were a number of people dealing with mental health and education in their countries. And I can't remember exactly what countries, but say it was like Lebanon and Nigeria and Brazil. All of them seeing the same trends as we're seeing over here in the U.S., kids dealing with this huge mental health issue post-pandemic. Like, we've always known mental health has been an issue, especially in communities of color, but now we're seeing it a lot more. What do you think about the access piece to this?
I kind of feel like before COVID, some people that might have had a little something brewing under the surface were able to manage or mask. And then we've all collectively experienced this stressor that COVID was and is. And that really kind of put a lot of people over the edge that might have been handling things a lot better before. So it wasn't just here in the United States, it was worldwide that people have been trying to figure out how they're going to cope with those types of things. People losing in-person instruction, we're still kind of trying to come around on the back end and fill in those gaps from people that would have been learning how to read, or high school kids that would have been learning their algebra or geometry, and they were on remote instruction only instead of in person. So it's kind of been a difficult wave to crest all the way over to the top.
Absolutely. And for educators, how has it affected them?
Even though I don't work in public schools anymore, I still have a lot of good friends that do. And just the stories that I've heard from educators, it's really difficult to imagine. I've been doing my job this way, for decades, and now all of a sudden we want you to do your job in a totally different way than what you've ever done it before at the drop of a hat, as fast as you can. That just has to be extremely stressful. And then, returning in person with students, there was still, the fear and apprehension about, are we going to be sick? Is a student going to bring us a virus that's going to make us, be incapacitated or worse? A lot of people had stress around that. And then the whole time, the expectation is that school is going to continue and that the students are still going to learn, even though all of that is kind of brewing around in the background. So it's just
big expectation.
Many layers of things going on that made it difficult both for the students and for the teachers.
Yeah. I'm thinking like just where we were as a nation 3 years ago. Really scary, by the way. Like, no one knew if they were going to live or die. Like, that's a real issue. For survival to have to kick in, you don't know whether you may get COVID and die. It was an issue that our kids were dealing with. And of course, parents. And then adding the other layer to that, there was a lot of racial tensions going on in our nation with the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. All of that was happening simultaneously. Then our political climate didn't help with Trump being president. So there was so many layers to this anxiety that we talk about that we thought was just going to go away, but in fact it is only worsened, which is why your work and the things that you're doing to your organization is so crucial.
That summary just made me feel anxious just hearing you, kind of recap it all. So, yeah, we've all been through a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm wondering, do you work with educators to train them? Because that's another piece. Educators are the ones dealing with kids in the classroom. And unfortunately, a lot of them are not equipped to handle kids in crises. When that happens, a lot of times they don't have the tools. At least what I've been seeing with the teachers that we work with, mainly in New York City, is educators are expected to find a way to work with these kids that are dealing with trauma. And some of them have even complained, I didn't sign up for this. I went to school to teach, not to deal with kids in crisis. So does your work extend to educators?
Yeah. Currently, I do a lot of one-on-one work with families that are trying to get the right goals, objectives, services, things like that written into their child's school plan.
Right.
So I've done a lot of case by case, like I think that you could really benefit from, some social skills work or some emotional regulation work, things like that. So I've been introducing that to teams one at a time for the benefit of a single student. Mm-hmm. I have been looking into developing some more training programs about helping teachers to understand, this is what neurodiversity means. Some students are coming in with mental health issues. Some kids are coming in with executive functioning. Some kids are coming in with autism spectrum. Right. So how to kind of meet those kids where they are and then also help them to excel out of some of those weaknesses that they have. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for your work. Thank you for what you're doing. So a parent that may feel like their kid needs some type of additional service, but they don't know where to start, what would you recommend?
My first inkling is always to kind of talk to your child's teacher to see, are you seeing the same things that I'm seeing at home? Right. There are some situations where, the child might be saving it up for you at home only, and at school, where we're not seeing the same things. Mm-hmm. Or it might be, you might get confirmation of, hey, I noticed that they're having difficulty in this area. Are you seeing it too? Right. And with that, that's going to be a sign that you might need to move forward. A lot of times that might be putting in some interventions or strategies in place in the classroom to see, is that sufficient to get the student to where they need? Right. And if those general classroom strategies and interventions are not sufficient, then they might need to look at moving forward with an evaluation for that student.
So parents hear the word evaluation and it's very scary. What would you suggest or any encouragement to parents that don't want to evaluate their kids because they're afraid of their kids being stigmatized, which is what we talked about a few moments ago?
Right. I can definitely see why somebody would be hesitant to have their child to do an evaluation, particularly families of color. They might have witnessed, like somebody being put into a bad placement or a bad situation because of the diagnosis that they received. So I can definitely understand why there might be some hesitation there. As a psychologist that does those types of evaluations, I'm looking at, where are we trying to get to on the other side? Yeah. So if we do the evaluation, it's going to give us information to confirm what are the strengths and weaknesses, what's going on, and then we'll have a better plan of action of how to support that student. Yeah. So, I think people assume that when they come to me for an evaluation that they're going to get a diagnosis. A lot of people do, but sometimes I'm like, the diagnosis is you have a teenager. There's not really a mental health diagnosis here, but I can tell you these are some strategies that I'm going to recommend, or some things that I recommend that can be helpful to you. So I think it's more about knowing what's going on so that you can make a plan to be helpful. Yeah. As far as the actual diagnosis that some people are apprehensive about, I don't like to think of it as putting a label on a child. Right. I like to think of it as getting them access to different services, programs, things like that they might not be able to have if we don't have this evaluation and confirm what's going on with them so that they can access those things. So those are the ways that I look at it. Let's find out more specifically what's going on to know what we need to do to help this student. Right. And then if they are in need of different services and programs, we're going to have that documentation to get them access to it.
Yeah, that's the prerequisite. If you want help for your child, you have to go through the evaluation. So for parents that have no idea what the evaluation process looks like, what can they expect?
So that's what I specialize in my psychology practice. When somebody calls up, I get an idea of what's going on. That sounds like something I can help with. Please come in for an intake appointment. So in that intake appointment, I ask a lot of questions about what's going on, what's working, what's not working, so that I can get a general idea of these are the areas that I really need to focus in on when we do the assessment. For the evaluation, the kid is going to come into my office for a couple of hours at a time, 1 to sometimes 3 appointments. We do some cognitive assessment to find out how their learning is, both their overall learning levels, and then do they have any strengths and weaknesses between visual, verbal, memory, speed, anything like that. We check out academic skills to see how they're doing reading, writing, and math. Are you at level, above, below? We do some rating scales, social emotional measures with them to find out what's going on. And then if there's anything specific, we might do some more assessment for specific areas of concern. From there, once I've collected all the data, got some information from parents and teachers in addition to working with that child, we're going to come back for a feedback appointment to talk about those results, what we think is going on, and in my opinion, the more important part is what are we going to do to help the students so they can be more successful.
That's awesome. Very comprehensive. Following in that feedback meeting that you have, are there services that you connect the parent to?
Right. I have a discussion with the parent. I usually produce a report that's in the neighborhood of about 20 pages, and I know it can feel. I was going to say, I know it can feel intimidating to receive a big packet of paperwork like that. Several pages of my reports are recommendations.
Awesome.
I like to have it all written down just so if anybody ever needs proof that a doctor recommended these things for the student, here it is written down, take it and show it to whatever school agency you need to get those services. It's documented. That's the paperwork side of things. When I'm talking to parents, though, I'm like, I know that this might seem overwhelming or intimidating. I'm going to break it down like, this is like number 1, 2, and 3. I know there's limited time in the day. I know there's limited funds in the bank. Out of all these different recommendations, this is going to be your most important. If you can, these other things would also be helpful. So sometimes it's recommendations for specific tutoring programs. Sometimes it's recommendations for therapy. In some situations, we're referring out to a medical professional who we think medication might help. Occupational therapy, speech therapy, other professionals that we think could help that student.
And I know we don't have time to go into the medication piece, but I know that's a whole nother avenue that many parents are afraid of pursuing for many reasons. And so, I love the fact that you're talking about that during that interview or that meeting.
Yeah, and I'm never one that I'm never quick to jump on the boat of like, let's put chemicals into a small body. I always try to exhaust all of the behavioral strategies and therapeutic strategies that we can first. But in some situations, it is okay to talk to a medical professional about if that could help you or not.
Yeah. You talked about the medical professional. What's the importance of the medical professional connecting and collaborating with psychologists on a child's well-being or care?
After I've evaluated a child, we've got that evaluation report that lets us know what their diagnoses are and what types of therapies and things we might be recommending. If it is a situation where medication could be helpful, that's where you're going to need your medical professional to not only consider you have these attention problems or you have these anxiety or depression problems, they're also going to have to consider your whole medical history to see, are there any medications that we can use with you that's not going to counteract or exacerbate any other mental or any other physical health problems that you might have.
And that's a huge piece that I don't feel like I see a lot of, the medical piece. It's often the psychological, academic, but how those all three work together seems to be a gap area, at least in New York City. I'm still learning Atlanta.
Yeah, sometimes when I am doing the evaluation process with families, we'll get into some questions about, well, how is your child sleeping and what are they eating? And sometimes cleaning up food, sleep, things like that. Those, I get hangry myself. So if we can get those things cleared up, that can lead to a lot of improvement in some cases, just kind of get into those basics.
That's awesome. Well, it's very, very informative. And I think for parents listening, they may be able to breathe a little now, knowing that the process is necessary, especially if you're seeing there is something that may be wrong with your child. I don't like to use the word wrong, but maybe a concern. You see something is concerning, or maybe your child is not developmentally where they need to be or where the standard state they should be, that there is a next step. And the next step may be scary, but it's necessary. And it is the prerequisite to getting the help that you need.
That's correct. When we are, especially like the young kids that are coming into school, you might have been at home and not exposed to a preschool setting or something like
Right.
that. And then, we've lost precious time that we could have been intervening and getting some of those skills developed. If you have a younger child and, we did a lot of talking about school age kids earlier, but if you have a younger child and you're
Right.
concerned about their development, talk to your pediatrician and see what they recommend.
Oh, yeah. And I've seen that personally, but also in my work, that a lot of times parents of younger kids are a lot more, they act a lot later. It's like, no, they're 3, it's okay. They'll grow out of it, that kind of thing. And then sometimes it's not that it's too late, but it's like if you've gotten in early intervention services at 2 or 3, they would have been, further along. So,
Right. I mean, it's that brain plasticity whenever they're very young.
Oh, yeah.
The neural pathways are still forming.
yes.
And if we can intervene with them when they're young, it's going to be a lot easier for them to develop those skills because their brain is still in that formation period.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And lastly, you came from the public school sector and you made the switch, but what would you say to public schools about working better with parents and with other organizations that are helping kids in the area of psychology and mental health?
Having kind of been on both sides of this fence now, I have really been honing in on the concept of meaningful parent participation. And I'm really focused on that word meaningful because
Right.
a lot of times I've seen parents that are physically present in the room at
Yeah.
a school meeting like an IEP or a 504. However, they're not really being given an opportunity to ask their questions or give their opinions. It's kind of like many families that come to me for advocacy services will say things like, I feel as if I've been gaslit. I feel like I got snowed. I felt like I was just bulldozed when I was at that meeting. Instead, I would like for schools to really think about providing parents with a full education about this is what we're proposing for your child. Do you understand this? Does it sound okay to you? Do you have other suggestions? So that they're actually involved in that decision-making process instead of just, here you are, this is what we're giving you. We want them to really be a part of that team and not just, we're going to check off the box that you were present so that, we can put that on our paperwork that you were here.
Yeah.
So meaningful parent participation so that they're a part of that decision-making process.
Yeah, I honestly would have assumed that was happening. To me, that's fundamental. So it would make sense when we talked about the parent trust issue with government or with school systems. It would make sense when decisions are made for you and for your life and you don't have control over them. It does make you very mistrustful. So, I do hope schools will be doing that, educating parents, providing psychoeducation, and collaborating with them, co-creating services and interventions because they're also the experts of their own kids.
That's right.
That's very important. This has been a really insightful conversation, Dr. Brandi, and I appreciate your time. Any last suggestions that you can give to parents as we close?
In closing, I just want to say that if you feel like something is going on with your child, that you need a professional to help you, go ahead and reach out so that your child can get the help that they need.
Yeah.
Even if it turns out to be nothing, at least you checked it out rather
Right.
than your child suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like to think about getting a child to a point where they can be as successful as they can possibly be.
Right.
And during those formative years, they need you as a parent to step up and help them with that. So if you have any concerns, get it checked out by somebody so that your child can get help if they need it.
Thank you. How can they reach you if they're interested in testing? What ways can they reach out to you to take that first step?
My psychological practice is Lightway Psychological Services. My advocacy business is Your IEP Source. So both of those, the websites, lightwaypsych.com, youriepsource.com. Those are going to be the easiest ways to get in touch with me. I do have Instagram and Facebook for my advocacy business, Your IEP Source. So I put a lot of information out there for parents in that way, and I have a newsletter and a membership program as well.
Awesome. Well, that's excellent. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Maybe we may have to bring you into New York to help us New Yorkers out there. But
if you could do away with that one thing.
Well, we appreciate you all for listening. Parents, you've got tons of information from Dr. Brandi. So now you can go do your research. You learned about 504s, IEPs, psychological testing, what to do when your child is seemingly like they have a concern, but you don't know what to do, how to take that first step. Dr. Brandi in her practice does all of that great work. There is hope for your child. So you don't have to be discouraged. Better said than done, but there is hope. There are resources. We want you to utilize it. Thank you all again so much for watching. Thank Dr. Brandi for joining us. Excuse me. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, and thank you all for subscribing and following us. Stay tuned. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.